common theme in midlife is lack of libido, lack of joy, anger, disconnect. I'm so excited to introduce to you Dianne Shepherd, a woman who started midlife feeling just like this. But then she used her menopausal transition to recreate herself. She now looks at menopause as being the passion portal, a sexual and spiritual rebirth into the richest, most creative and sexiest chapter of a woman's life. If this sounds appealing, stay tuned. You're listening to Menopause Natural Solutions, episode 110, Nourishing Our Libido with Dianne Shepherd. Welcome to Menopause Natural Solutions, your podcast for all things perimenopause, menopause and beyond. Stay tuned as your host, Naturopath Jennifer Harrington, explains how to use natural therapies to find your ultimate health and happiness during your transition. So welcome back, ladies. As you know, I have a very special guest with me today. Dianne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Also, I'm so excited about today because libido is such a huge topic. I would say it's one of the top 3 symptoms that women mention as they're going through the menopausal transition, and it's a symptom that we haven't discussed. And I really believe if you want the very best health possible for you, that includes having the very best sexual health. So Dianne, I've been a fan of yours for a little while, and I've read through your bio, and when I hear your history, I really think it resonates with so many women because so many women have had physical symptoms of the menopausal journey, and they've also had issues with disconnection from their partner. And I love the way that you came full circle around this and made this potentially one of the best things that have ever happened in your life. So would you mind just explaining to the listeners how perimenopause was for you?
Sure. Nope. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, I went through menopause. I guess I started perimenopause probably around 39 years of age and was in full-blown menopause at age 40. And a little on the early side for a lot of women, although I've heard that that's kind of happening a lot more lately, and I'm not sure why. But anyway, it really hit me like a freight train. I was a busy mom. All 3 of my boys were still at home and still quite young at the time. My husband was just finishing up medical school and starting residency. So we were going full throttle. And I just never addressed a lot of the pelvic floor issues that I had after having 3 big babies within the span of about 5 years. I just got busy as a mom, never took it seriously. And incontinence, I had a low level of pelvic organ prolapse. I also was having some vaginal dryness even before menopause, but then that really got worse with menopause and pelvic pain. I was experiencing, painful sex. And so therefore sex wasn't happening. I had no desire for sex. My libido was tanked. Let's see. I also had some sciatica as well, which resulted in a pretty bad limp. And I also was a Pilates teacher at the time. So I was trying to address a lot of these issues through fitness, through Pilates specifically. And I love Pilates. It's fantastic, but it just was not addressing my deeper issues. And when menopause really came in, those issues definitely magnified and got worse. And I was just so frustrated. And after visiting a doctor, I always call it the worst pelvic exam ever. This doctor was so insensitive and just had this narrative about it, like, oh, well, what do you expect? This is the beginning of the end, and all this toxicity, negative attitude. She just, and by no means there's a lot of wonderful allopathic doctors out there that I've, spoken to since about it, but she was just awful. And so I just walked out of there. I was just like, I need to find a better way. Like, I don't know. There's something in me that just is like, I'm just getting started. And I feel like I am not going to be put out to pasture like this, or like it's beginning. What are you talking about? Beginning of the end. So, yeah, I just opened up, to like, well, what else is there? And other things started coming in.
Yes, I know you and I both love Dr. Northrup. She has just been such a pioneer in my world anyway. She was the first woman that came on the scene to talk about other options and pleasure and sensuality and being a goddess. And yeah, it's so wonderful to have such a good role model like her to stand on her shoulders and continue the message forward.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she's incredible. And that woman has changed my life a number of times for a number of reasons. And I've only met her once personally. We're not friends, but like she's opened me up to this whole world. At the time we're talking about, I was on her newsletter list. This is way back. We used to get them in the mailbox, the newsletter in the mailbox days. And so, she's always had great advice in terms of holistic practices and how can you take care of yourself. She started using that language like goddess. And I was like, I'm very intrigued. What's going on here? And then she started talking more and more about pleasure. And that was fascinating. And then she introduced through the newsletter, this woman, Mama Gina, who ran this school of pleasure in Manhattan in New York City. And I live in upstate New York. So I was like, who is this Mama Gina woman? This is fascinating. And next thing you knew, I was enrolled and went down for her mastery program and ended up studying with Regina Thomas Howard, her real name, for years, and just never looked back in terms of like pleasure is amazing. And I have to really, give Dr. Northrup full credit for that, because I probably wouldn't have ever even had it on my radar as something that was going to really help me in my health and my happiness and my marriage and all those things. I wasn't even looking in that direction.
So what would you say are some of the key lessons that you learned through Dr. Northrup and Mama Gina?
That's a great question. Just that pleasure is a source of power. It's a source of empowerment in the way that when we start to really take back our pleasure, the agency around it, right? It's a big decision to decide that pleasure is important or that I'm a sensual being. That's a big choice that I had to make. And then the decision that, wow, it's my responsibility. I have to take back my agency around this and start to cultivate, experiences that bring me pleasure, because it changed everything. It just helped me land in my body and be more present. First of all, it was a way in, coming into my senses, into my body, into my joy and pleasure. I didn't realize how starved I was for it until I started experiencing it and making it a priority, and just really fitting it into my busy life in little micro doses made a big difference in how I felt. And now that I know more about the nervous system, of course, I was really nourishing my nervous system, nourishing my libido with pleasure. And it had an enormous effect on my physical health, but also, of course, in my relationship as well. It ended up really transforming my marriage over time. And yeah.
So that's a huge journey. And I can imagine there are lots of little steps along the way. It wouldn't have been that you woke up one day and decided, right, this is it.
Yeah.
It would have taken quite some time. But where do you think you started? How did you think you started adding pleasure into your life?
That's awesome. Yeah, Regina's a genius at what she does at getting people from that very beginning stages and just starting to become, she had us just to be kind of investigate, be an explorer, experiment. What really turns you on? Like, what makes you happy? Not just sexually, but like in general, because every woman is so different. And she just got everybody curious about, what does actually give me pleasure? I know what I like to complain about. That's pretty clear. And that wasn't really getting me very far. So yeah, we know you're good at complaining, but what about pleasure? what makes you happy? And so just that confrontational question, again and again, and just started opening doors for me and helped me start to make those little choices throughout the day. Say, what am I going to have for breakfast? Is it something that I'm just putting fuel in my body, or is this something that actually gives me pleasure? And can it be healthy and give me pleasure? That was another beautiful question to kind of feel into. Little things like that can just be a game changer.
I can imagine you can look at everything in your life. What do I wear today? Am I going to put on nice lingerie for myself, or am I going to put on comfortable clothes because that's what will be pleasurable for me? Listening to you talk brought up a book for me. I'm wondering if you've ever read The 5 Love Languages.
It's on my shelf, but I haven't.
That is another one that talks about how we send and receive love. So for some people, it's physical touch. For some people, it's words of affection. For some people, it's acts of service. For some people, it's quality time. For other people, it's gifts. So that's also something I think is worth considering if you and your partner are sending and receiving love in the same way, or if there's a disconnect there. If maybe for example, if my love language was words of affection and yours was physical touch, you could see that there could be a disconnect there. So I think that's also a good book to read.
Thanks for reminding me about that one. I know it's on my shelf, and I know I've talked about the concept with friends many times. I'm like, I've got to read that one. I've just finished your book. I'm finishing your book, so I've got a good stack there.
Oh, the next one that's coming up.
My husband and I too, we really got into astrology, and that was helpful for us too, in a similar way of like, what our makeup is and what truly makes us happy and help us feel grounded. So that's just similar in that way of like looking at, we might be coming at this from very different places. Yeah.
But I love that ultimately you guys did something together. It wasn't your problem that you had to fix. It wasn't his problem that he had to fix. It was something that you did together. And I know that not always the other partner is involved or happy to come along on the ride. Sometimes you need to do the work first, but it's also wonderful when you can do it together.
Yeah, eventually we did. I did do a lot of work myself initially as well. And he was very, very supportive, 100%. When he heard about Mama Gina's program, he's like, yes, go. Don't worry about the price. Just do it. So yes, he was very supportive. But it did take a lot of self-cultivation and responsibility on my part to get to a place, I think, that I could invite him into what I was learning about pleasure. And so we didn't hop right into couples work. Some people definitely do that. But it took a little bit for us to come around to that place where I felt comfortable, because I wanted it to be all about me and my own kind of private investigation for a while, because we were pretty like two ships passing in the night for a while there. We just got really distant. And so that felt good to just kind of reclaim my space. And I don't know if you've heard this on my podcast at any point, but I ended up building a yurt, this structure. It's kind of like a tent-like structure, but it's like 3 seasons. You can I have a wood stove in there. I built a yurt in my backyard. It's pretty extreme, but I really wanted space. And maybe some women going through menopause or perimenopause can relate to that. What I wanted was pleasure, yes, but space to figure it out. And that felt very pleasurable to me too.
I love that. And especially living in a household with 3 sons and a husband, it probably would have been nice to have a break from all of that testosterone too, so that you can actually have some space and some time for yourself.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah. And our house was the house to hang out. All the boys were always here. It was fun. But yeah, I needed some feminine space as well.
I totally get it. I love that. So moving on, I know that you really like the use of jade eggs, but before we get into anything about jade eggs, something we were going to discuss that we sort of bypassed was just the frequency of trauma and what to do if this conversation is actually triggering you.
Yes, I want to, first of all, kind of just say that it's such a an important conversation that I think we're all starting to have around trauma and how common it is to have different levels of trauma. There are, like, of course, very serious traumas and assaults and things like that, but every woman carries some level of trauma around their sexuality, I believe. And if anything that we're talking about triggers you, I want to normalize that. That makes sense. It totally makes sense. And I always invite any woman who's interested in my work and has experienced acute trauma that always start with a professional, a therapist first would be great before heading into something like the Jade egg practice, where we have more and more somatic trauma specialists coming out now with Peter Levine's work and things like that. Somatic experiencing would be another great place to start before hopping into something like the Jade egg practice. I am a trauma-informed coach, but I'm not a trauma expert. So I always like to set that container for people because it's so important to get the proper, support and guidance. Yeah.
So now we can move on to the Jade egg. So
okay.
for listeners who might not have heard of the Jade egg, what is the Jade egg?
The Jade egg, yes. This is, it's a whole practice. And this is so important to get because there's a lot of misleading information online, honestly, and sometimes some very well-educated people, I just don't understand that it's a whole yoga system. It's a whole practice, because it's sometimes marketed as just, you just take this jade egg or yoni egg, crystal egg, and you put it in your vagina and magic happens. It's going to magically heal you. That's so not what it's about at all. There's this whole ancient system just steeped in feminine wisdom to heal. It's this whole yoga system, basically from the Taoist tradition, devoted to balancing and revitalizing the female body and really targeted on the pelvis and the vagina with the jade egg, but it really is a whole body healing and even emotional healing and spiritual healing. So there's just similar to yoga, there's a physical kind of asana component to the practice, but also emotional and spiritual. There's a lot there. And so it's definitely not just about getting a piece of gemstone or jade and doing Kegels with it, doing Kegel exercises with it or anything like that. You'd get some benefit from that. But the jade egg practice is a lot more multidimensional and holistic than just doing a Kegel exercise or just squeezing. It's never about creating tightness. That's important to get to.
Yes, I know a lot of pelvic physiotherapists that say sometimes it's not your inability to contract, it's your inability to relax that could be causing your problems. So I'm glad that you mentioned that it's not always about the contraction, that you need to be able to do both, contract and relax.
100%. In fact, I don't think I ever use the word squeeze when I teach the jade egg. It's more about getting full range of motion and tone and suppleness and even dexterity with the vagina, not tightness, because there's a huge epidemic of pelvic pain, resulting from chronically held tension that we can make worse if we're just focusing on squeezing and tightening and on all of those things that sometimes you see online. Yeah.
So if a woman was interested in the jade egg practice, do you have a course or a resource or anything that can point them in the right direction?
Sure. I previously did a lot of one-on-one sessions with women, and then I even had a course that I was running for a while. And then recently I decided to start a membership style program because what I found was that this is an unfolding, and it puts a lot of pressure, I think, on a woman to say, we've got to get this done in 6 or 8 weeks. It's a whole lifestyle. It's really a lifestyle, a new paradigm, if you will, of really taking your pleasure more seriously and really embodying your sensuality and doing the healing work around that. And so I wanted to extend it into a more membership program where women can really just land and exhale and take all the time they need and get that support more long-term without putting pressure on themselves, like, oh, I need to be able to move through this. And we have that in our culture, in the Western world, I think, of moving from point A to point B for a transformational journey. And this is more of a spiraling, circuitous path, if you will. And healing isn't straightforward. I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but there's a lot to it, right? Our sexuality does not happen in a vacuum. And there's so many things that factor into it. And every woman's journey is so unique. So anyway, yes, I do have a membership program right now that is brand new, and it's really fun. It's a small and mighty community, and we're just having really a fun time in there, just exploring and supporting each other. So yeah.
Are there any other techniques or tools apart from the jade egg that you recommend?
Yeah, the jade. It's funny because the jade egg practice, there's a lot in there. It's about movement, there's breath work involved, and there's sounding, even vibrational healing. So it is like there's a lot within that practice. When I say so, there's a lot in there. I teach a very movement-centric approach to the jade egg. So we do sensual movement. That's something I would really recommend for anyone interested in connecting with their sexual energy in this way, their sensuality. Sensual movement has been a big part of my own healing journey. And as a former Pilates teacher, I love movement. And so I really wanted to bring that into how I teach the jade egg. So we do a whole thing on sacred sensual movement of just moving the pelvis, basically in the way the pelvis is designed to move, rather than trying to make it do something, like kind of just looking at the anatomy in terms of functional anatomy, what really wants to happen, and just allow those natural movements to happen. And in a non-linear way. And that can be so rejuvenating in and of itself. So more simply said, you could just do hip circles in your kitchen and have a great experience of really awakening this energy and really nourishing your libido, right? So anything that I just mentioned would be nourishing to the libido. I don't like the word boost for libido. I feel like what we need as women, from what I found in my work, is just a deep nourishment and replenishment and rejuvenation through practices like movement and breath and rest. Yeah.
I want to bring up a point. When you were just talking, I'm a former ballerina or a former dancer. So in one of your podcasts, you were talking about pelvic tuck, which is something as a dancer, you tuck in everything, draw in your tummy, tuck in your tailbone, and you reduce the mobility of the pelvis. You're all frozen in there. So I love, I've watched some of your videos on dancing and movement. And like you said, even just like the figure eight or just swirling your hips in the kitchen, just getting some movement and freedom. But I also really love dance as pleasure.
Oh,
I love salsa dancing. When I was younger, I did a bit of tribal dancing, which was just so much fun. But it's just getting back into your body. And for me, movement is key to my pleasure.
Oh yeah. Movement for me is huge too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, anything that gives you pleasure. One of the first things I do with women is just have them connect with what I call their inner pleasure queen, and just kind of go through your memory of experiences and come to a memory that really brought you a lot of sensual pleasure. It doesn't have to be sexual. It could be watching a sunset or going on a hike somewhere. You just, those times where you're in your zone, you're in your flow. I think we've all had those experiences, and just kind of unpack that for yourself a little bit. Allow yourself to feel the sensations of that. Let that come alive in your body, and do practices or habits. Bring habits in that really help you get back into that place, into that zone.
So just listening to you talk, I just think about nature. I think most women will have some connection with some form of nature, whether it's water or mountains or just being barefoot on the grass or barefoot on the sand. I guess when you think about pleasure, there are so many aspects to it. Like my first moment of, I guess, pure bliss was when I was a little girl learning to snorkel and snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, where it was much healthier back then, but just the abundance of colours and sea life, it was pure bliss. And there was absolutely nothing sexual about it. It was just joy of life and living and being in that moment.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. That's beautiful. Yeah. We forget, like when I say we're all sensual beings, that we all have five senses, or, most five senses, we have senses. And it's a pathway into embodiment and presence. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't have to be sexual at all. It could just be those times when you just feel fully alive.
So when we bring that conversation back to menopause, I know that you talk about menopause as being the passion portal. It's that one of those times in life where you can flip a switch and you can go either way. And let's use that for positive outcomes. And I know you think about it as being the most creative and sexiest chapter of a woman's life. How do you think menopause is the trigger for that rebirth?
That's so great. Yeah, one of the many things I love about the Taoist perspective on this is they call menopause the second spring, and it's considered to be a sexual and spiritual rebirth. And that's so foundational to how they view things, how our sexual energy is really the foundation for everything, our vitality, our joy, our creativity. Also, it fuels our spiritual path. So there's this connection to our spiritual evolution and unfolding in that way as well. And menopause, for me, and for a lot of women I speak to about this, it brings up a lot of strong emotion. And anger is a big one for a lot of people. And maybe some resentment, depending on, what's going on in your life. Could be also grief. But it seems to be, for a lot of women, maybe not all, but a lot of women I speak to, a time of strong emotion. And again, from the Taoist perspective, our emotions, it's energy, and we can recycle and alchemize them rather than try to get rid of. So what I see in myself when I look back, feeling really angry and resentful, I was having a lot of bouts of that. I learned how to use that as fuel, as passion. And one of my teachers back in Mama Gina's school said, rage is passion without a place to play. And I thought that was such a great quote that really stuck with me. And I said, okay, so yeah, how do I give my passion here a place to play? What do I really want? And how do I make that happen? And so that led to a lot of the practices I do to really give my passion a place to play and cultivate my sexual energy, and use these Taoist practices to, again, recycle or alchemize emotional energy rather than have it stay stuck or stagnant, which can really cut us off from our vitality unless we use it to transform our lives, which we totally can. Yeah.
I love that. It's so relevant. It's, definitely. Anger, resentment, they're key emotions that women go through. And I love that phrase that anger is, what was it again? That it's fuel for passion?
Rage is passion without a place to play.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, so we need to get out there and play some more.
Yes.
Find our passion and play some more.
I honestly think a lot of it is maybe stuck sexual energy that feels like rage, anger, and it wants to come out and play. Yeah.
And maybe not just stuck sexual energy, maybe even just stuck life force. So many of us get to this stage of life and then just go, oh, I've just become a mum. Who am I? Or I've just become a worker, or I'm so busy looking after everyone else, I've lost who I am.
Oh, yes. Right. You start to feel like a collection of functions, right?
Yes.
That's how I felt for sure. Yes. And that question of like, there's got to be more, what's the more? Yeah.
And how can I add more joy into my life rather than it just being a mechanical, I get up, I do this, do that, go back to bed, reset, start again, Groundhog Day kind of thing. How can it be something that I wake up in the morning and I'm excited about today and excited about what else is possible, what could be? So
absolutely.
Sounds like play is key.
Yes. However you define that. Again, every woman's different. And yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I've absolutely loved our conversation today. If a woman wants to reach out and get hold of you, how can she find you?
Oh, sure. Probably the best way is just on my website. You can send me a message. Dianne@shakticore.com is my email. Mm-hmm. If you'd like to follow my podcast is Wild Menopause. It's on Apple and things like that. I usually have links to contact me in the show notes of that as well. So yeah, shakticore.com is my website, and Dianne@shakticore.com is my email.
So I will get the spelling and I'll put that in the show notes so that women can find it. Awesome. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
No, I just love talking about this. I feel like we need more and more conversations, and it's a really exciting time right now, I think, to be a woman, a seasoned woman, I'll say, because I feel that we are in a cusp of this revolution. And I think your book is a big part of it, right? Going from invisible to invincible. Absolutely. And more women are really getting interested in the transformation that's possible. And I think it's going to change the world. Women are so powerful.
Well, thank you for being a role model for someone who's been there, done that, and came out the other end stronger, healthier, happier, better relationships, more pleasure in your life. Because we also need those role models to say, look, this is possible. If she can do it, I can do it. And it's not like you're asking women to do really difficult or really expensive things. It comes down to what brings you joy and what brings you pleasure. And if it's a 5-minute walk each day, great.
Yes.
And then build from there.
Yes. Microdose. The microdosing of pleasure is so important, because we can get overwhelmed. Like, I have time for pleasure. I don't have 3 hours. I don't have an hour, but we got 5 minutes. Yeah. We could always take that 5 minutes, and it adds up. You put that in your account, and it starts to build interest.
Your nervous system will love you for it.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it from us today. Dianne, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Jen. It's been so much fun.
We'll talk again next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Menopause Natural Solutions. This podcast contains general information about menopause. It is provided as a guide, and it is not intended to replace medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend.